little bit about me. Phil gave a great introduction there and sort of talked about some of the key things. I used to live in Bristol for 20 years. Some of you might know me from when I used to run the Bristol WordPress community. Some of you might know me from when I was teaching on the Develop Me Bootcamp. More recently, I'm co-founder of the Green Tech Southwest meetup. So if this stuff feels like your bag, if you feel like you're interested in coming to meet like-minded techies, or not even techies talking about sustainability, you're super welcome at the Green Tech Southwest meetup. And our next meetup is in person here in Bristol next Wednesday. And if you're not here in Bristol, you can join online. So we're trying a hybrid thing. Wish us luck. Oh my God, it's a lot of work. Okay. So Phil kind of basically did my talk for me in those few minutes. So awesome. Thanks, Phil. That's great. All right. What am I going to cover in this talk? So I'm going to start off spending quite a bit of time talking to you about what sustainability actually is, because there's a lot of confusion within the industry about what actual sustainability is. There's lots of people that maybe think they understand parts of it, but there's a big picture here to think about. So I want to explain that to you all first. Then we're going to get talking into how digital technologies themselves can be unsustainable. I'm going to try a bit of audience participation. It might be brilliant. It might be awful. Either way, just give me a hug afterwards and tell me it was okay. And throughout this talk, I really want to give you some meaningful actions that I hope you can all take away. Spoiler, a lot of these actions are really, really, really tough. There is no magic button you can press to make stuff sustainable. It takes a lot of graphs. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about that stuff as well. And hopefully, we're going to have some time, if I don't sort of ramble on and get lost too much, we're going to talk about greenwashing in this sector as well, and how you can avoid those pitfalls, either intentional or not. Okay, so are we ready? Yes? Yes. I'm ready. Okay. So let's talk about how we define sustainability. So in 1987, there was a very seminal report written. It was called the Brundtland Report, and it had a definition about sustainability. And that definition talked about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. In other words, let's not fuck over the people that are coming on behind us. Now, I think that's a good starting point with sustainability. That's good. But more recently, I've been looking for other models that we can use to talk about sustainability. The model that I have fallen most deeply in love with is the doughnut economics model. And I'd love a show of hands. Has anybody here heard of doughnut economics? Does anybody here know a little bit about it? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay, so 6 or 7 hands. Awesome. I'm delighted then to be able to present to the rest of you a little bit about doughnut economics. This is a model that I really like for talking about sustainability because it's full of good analogies. Who doesn't want to talk about donuts, right? There's a lot of fun that you can have with donuts. I did a little photo shoot in my office. Unfortunately, I forgot my camera, so I had to use my phone, so I'm sorry they're a bit shit. But I did have a lot of fun, and I got to eat a lot of donuts that day, so 1+ for talking about doughnut economics. But it's the good analogies. It's easily accessible to people. Sustainability is a complex topic, but I love doughnut economics because it does make it a bit easier for everyone to understand. It shows us a holistic view of sustainability, and it does that by putting humanity in the center of conversations about sustainability. Ecological and planetary considerations are a factor in sustainability, but we're far more likely to make progress when we center humanity in the conversations around sustainability. And doughnut economics does just that. We owe a massive debt of gratitude to this incredible woman, Kate Rayworth. Woo! Kate, let's hear for Kate. Well done, Kate. Kate is the originator of this methodology, so I am just here kind of parroting her amazing work to you. In 2012, Kate was working for Oxfam. She developed a report about doughnut economics, so that's where we saw this first concept. And in 2017, she expanded those concepts to write this awesome book, Doughnut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. I'm hoping that the sort of 7 of you or so that put your hand up maybe have read this book, or at least own it, and it's on your bookshelf, and it's intention. Yeah, okay, you're intending to read it. It's highly worth it. I got one nitpick about this book, and that's the title. She's called it 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. My nitpick is that I would scrub that word economist out and I would say to think like a 21st century person or a 21st century citizen. The concepts in this book are absolutely relevant to every single one of us in this room. Whatever role you're in, whatever decision-making power you have, this stuff is relevant. So that would be like my one nitpick. Otherwise, it's beautiful and perfect and wonderful in every way. And so what Kate's book talks about, Donut Economics, and the Brundtland report that I mentioned at the beginning of this section, it talks about these 3 key pillars. Sustainability comprises of 3 key pillars. Pillar number 1 is environmental considerations. And perhaps most people that first start learning about sustainability start thinking about the planet and the planet's resources. And that's your environmental set of considerations. We've also got pillar 2. Pillar 2 is around social considerations. It's about humanity. Humanity is part of this planet. We are also types of animals. We also need to think of ourselves within this aspect of sustainability. So we've got social as number 2. And then we've got this 3rd pillar, which is around economics and governance. Basically, it's decision-making and how we think. Okay, so we've got these 3 pillars and we've got pictures of donuts. You might be thinking at this point, Hannah, what are you on about? How do these 2 things relate? Well, let's get them relating. And honestly, my favorite kind of donut. I like a plain donut, a simple glazed donut. And I'm really sorry, because I know it's pre-lunch. And it's a bit cruel, but, you know, hey, there we go. I had to go with it. So this is my absolute favorite kind of donut. And let's talk about these 3 pillars. So I mentioned to you that what donut economics does is put humanity in the center of sustainability. So we can draw a nice little circle in the middle of the donut there, and we can think about that as something called the social foundation. The social foundation is made up of 12 points that represent different things that we as humans need. So it's got things that are like basic human needs, so things like food, water, shelter, things that we need in order to survive. It also has a set of other points within the social foundation that are points around thriving as humans. So things like dealing with social inequality, things like peace and justice, things like access to the internet, actually, would fall into the social foundation. So there's 12 points, and those are based on the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So we've got the inner ring, the social foundation. We have the outer ring. And the outer ring forms our ecological ceiling. Now, this is a set of 9 points that define for us the ecological boundaries within which we must work. The planet is not infinite, although people, I'm about to go on a rant that's not part of the talk, so I'm not going to go, I'm not doing it. I'm just going to talk about the fact that we have a defined set of resources that the planet can offer to us, and that we have to work within those. And that is called the ecological ceiling. And there's 9 of those, and those come from the Stockholm Institute. You guessed it, based in Stockholm. So there's those 9. So the social foundation in the middle, with the ecological ceiling around the outside, give us this beautiful donut shape. The glaze, my favorite part of the donut. No donut is complete without a glaze. That glaze that goes over the top, we can picture that as how we govern ourselves, how we think, how we behave. And in tech, we really need to pay more attention to how we're thinking and how we're behaving. So the glaze is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's an essential part of a beautiful donut. And so there we go. Sorry for the crap squiggles, but the idea is the donut represents this sweet spot that we need to exist within if humanity is to thrive, not just survive. Sustainability is about helping everybody to thrive and be the best human that they can be. I'm not sure how well this image is going to sort of show up on the screen here, but this is kind of like a full donut with all the dimensions. For those of you on Twitter, my slides are going to publish shortly at the end of my talk. Hopefully I got the TweetDeck thing to work. So you can take a more closer look at the 12 dimensions in the middle and the 9 dimensions on the outside. The point I'm really trying to get across to you in this first part of the talk is that sustainability is way more than just carbon emissions. We are focusing on carbon emissions. It's a metric that we can measure, we can talk about, and I'll talk about how we're doing that within the tech sector shortly. But I really want to get across to you that your journey on sorting out sustainability might start with thinking about carbon emissions, but there's way more to it than just that. So data centers use a lot of land and they use a lot of water. Now, I've put this in the social foundations section. Although land and water, you might be thinking, are an ecological resource thing to think about. The truth is you can't separate these two things from each other. They're very intrinsic. Humans will feel the impacts of abuse of ecological resources. But data centers will use lots of land and water. What we've got at the moment is a situation where we've got lots of data centers, say, being built in the desert in America. Well, where's that water coming from to cool those data centers? Who is losing out from that water being used to cool that data center? Well, I can tell you who it is. It's marginalized communities that are losing out. So what we need to be aware of here is that data centers do have an impact. They also need land. Has anyone ever visited a data center? Stick your hand up if you have. Yeah, not many of you. I've never visited a data center, actually. We don't see them. They're hidden from us. But they're very real, and they really do exist, and they really do use ecological resources. And those ecological resources impact people. So there's a whole load of stuff for us to be aware of with data centers. Okay, I'm going to talk very quickly about social equity. When I'm talking about social equity, I'm talking about a situation in society where we have sectors of society that have and sectors of society that have not, that don't have. And in digital tech, we can talk about that as people that have access to digital tech and people that don't. And we know that access to digital tech can open doors for lots and lots of people. So within the tech sector, how much thought and effort are we putting into the people that we're leaving behind, the people that aren't lucky enough to access tech? And this is all part of what we need to think about when we think about a holistic view of sustainability. Okay, I'm going to move on. Ecological boundaries then. So there's probably not much for me to say on the electricity production because you all stood up with bar one or two of you. We all know fossil fuels are bad, right? Yeah, I don't need to explain this to you. I think you've all got the picture. Fossil fuels are bad. We do not want to be powering digital tech with fossil fuels. We want to be using cleaner energy sources such as wind, such as sun. Nuclear, oh, okay, I'm not going to get into that convo now. There is an absolutely brilliant report written, I love the name of this, I think it's great. It's called Greenhouse Gangsters versus Climate Justice. Anyone read it or heard of it? Okay, no, homework for you all, go and read it. It's quite old, it was written in 1999. It talks about just how insidious the fossil fuel industry is. The fossil fuel industry is the tobacco industry of today. Apart from the tobacco industry was killing a number of individuals, the fossil fuel industry is kind of killing everyone and kind of the whole planet at the same time. It is really, really, really worth exploring just how toxic and dangerous the fossil fuel industry is and why we've got to wean ourselves off it. So check out Greenhouse Gangsters versus Climate Justice. Great report. And another ecological boundary for us to think about within the digital tech industry is around physical hardware. So I mentioned to you, where's my phone gone? These rare raw materials that end up in your phone. Did you know that between 80 and 90% of the pollution caused by this thing is caused by the fact that it exists? It's caused by its manufacture, not its use. So just owning one of these is pretty damaging straight off the bat. Now look, I'm not here to tell you shouldn't be using digital tech, but what I am hopefully using this opportunity to tell you about is that maybe we should value this stuff a bit more. Maybe as a tech industry, we could be doing a little bit more to help people use these things for longer. I'll talk a bit more about that in a tick. All right. So this is a little side project I've been working on. It's called doingthedoughnuT.tech. You're welcome to visit the website. It's very much in beta, very much a work in progress. But I've been using the doughnut economics model to explore a holistic way of talking about the digital tech sector, digital tech sector's impact on global sustainability. And in particular, looking at how the 7 ways, which I haven't really talked to you about now, how those 7 ways that Kate Rayworth talks about, how we can apply those and that thinking within the digital tech sector. So I'm looking for collaborators as well. If anyone wants to come and work with me on it, that would be cool. Okay, so we're like halfway through. So let's talk about something that I think most of you were perhaps expecting me to talk about in this talk. Let's talk about the CO2 emissions that come from digital services. Now, this slide says digital service GHG emissions, Inc. CO little letter 2. So what am I on about? Okay. Who here knows what GHG stands for? Cool. Actually, not as many as I was thinking. Maybe a quarter of you put your hands up. GHG stands for greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions, the gases that are included within greenhouse gases are quite numerous. It's not just carbon emission. There's a number of other gases to think about. So carbon dioxide is one. We've also got methane. We've got nitrous oxide. We've got perfluorocarbons. We've got sulfur hexafluoride and hydrofluorocarbons. I had to practice those quite hard. Yes, I got them out. When we talk about sustainability, we've all become a little bit obsessed with CO2. And that's cool. CO2 is a massive problem. It definitely contributes to global warming. It's something that we can measure. But what I would really like to get across to you all is it is not the full picture. There is a lot more going on with the gases that we're releasing into the atmosphere that are causing climate change. It's one of many, but it's something that we measure, and that's cool. And there's nothing wrong with measuring that, and there's nothing wrong with using that as our metric of success, as long as we know there's other things going on as well. And that's very much the theme of this talk, is to say, hey, we can focus on these things, that's cool, but let's just remember there's bigger issues to think about as well. So ICT, another crazy acronym. ICT, Information Communications Technology. Basically, we can call this digital tech. That's what academia tend to call digital tech. ICT creates between 1.2 and 3.9% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so, all right, a figure. What does that mean? So what it means is if ICT or digital tech was a country, it would be the 7th biggest polluter in the world. And that makes this sector more polluting than aviation. So folks, we do have a bit of an issue, and we do need to kind of get on it and make some changes. So let's talk about how we can measure our digital services in terms of CO2 emissions. And the proxy way of doing this is by looking at the amount of data that we're transferring. So data transfer, e.g. how many megabytes or kilobytes we're sending down the wire for someone to view a digital service, the amount of stuff we're sending down we can equate to CO2 emissions. So the way that we do that is we have some figures that say for every unit of data we send, let's say for every megabyte, it's going to use this much electricity. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of assumptions and averages that get used in that, but if we spend all of our time trying to make this perfect, we won't actually, climate change will have kind of come and gone. So it's okay for us to kind of use some sort of averages, basically. So we have some data, and that tells us for every kilobyte or megabyte we send, we use this much energy. And then for every unit of energy, we can use some information called carbon intensity data to make an estimate of how much carbon emissions was emitted per unit of electricity we use. So therefore, we can equate to what we have on the screen here, data transfer equals CO2 emissions. So this is yet another reason for us to focus on performance and optimization, as if you didn't need any more reasons, because our talks already today have been very focused on performance and optimization. But we've got another cracking reason right here in front of us to focus on performance and optimization. There are a whole bunch of measurement tools. I've put them at the end of the slide pack because I could spend, the whole talk just showing you the measurement tools that are out there. There's lots that are freely available to use, lots of open source ones that are also looking for contributors. So let's talk about some actions then that everyone in this room, hopefully might be able to take to reduce their CO2 emissions of digital services. So I've already talked to you about the relationship between the payload, the amount of data that you're sending, and the CO2 emissions. So one of the first things that you can do is reduce the amount of data being generated and sent. That's kind of good, right? Anyway, we want to do that anyway for good reasons. So things like we can focus on our content. We can think about media, images, video. We can optimize those. We can use lazy loading. We can not have autoplay on all our videos, which would be super nice. We can do those things to reduce the amount of data being sent. Analytics is also a real pain in the arse when it comes to data size. Reducing the amount of analytics that you're using is a really powerful way to reduce your CO2 emissions. And of course, make the experience much nicer for people. And adverts as well. I think Leonie mentioned adverts a little bit earlier, and the iframes, nobody wants them, nobody likes them, and we can also reduce the size of our sites as well by taking them out. We can also look at good UX as a method for reducing the amount of data. Really good UX will allow people to find the things they're looking for super quick. So that means fewer pages that are unnecessarily loaded. Embrace search. Search is awesome. And actually, when it comes to CO2 emissions, it's not that bad. It's actually pretty good. So embrace search. Good UX is going to make all the difference for reducing the amount of emissions coming from your digital service. We can also talk about technical choices here as well. I'm not going to kind of get into technical choices too much in this talk. If you want to come and have a chat with me over a drink a bit later, we can talk about technical choices. But technical choices, such as the different CMSs that we have out there, such as using static files to deliver experiences to people, the use of caching, for example, all of these things can be super, super helpful in reducing the data that we're sending. And reducing the server work as well. Okay, so we talked about data being generated and sent. We can talk a little bit about the electricity sources that you and your supply chain are using. I think you all seem pretty aware on this. What I would say, if any of you are looking for data centers or hosting providers that are using green/renewable energy sources, you can use the Green Web Foundation's directory. Who here has heard of the Green Web Foundation or has used it? Awesome. Okay, we've just won a bucket load of funding to make those systems better. So hopefully in the next 6 months, you're going to see much better directories, much better information to help you find providers that are sustainable, not just electricity sources, but a wider view of sustainability. Supporting the least powerful device is actually a massive thing that you can do to reduce emissions. I already said to you, this phone just existing has created loads of emissions. So let's help people hang on to them for longer. Let's think about supporting older devices. Can we just slow down a little bit with all these frameworks and shit that we're creating? I've got to say, as a freelance developer, I find it actually quite tough to keep up with. But the sort of dark side is it means that people are having to get rid of their phones and their tech earlier because things keep progressing. I'm not really sure if the progress is really adding that much value to people's social foundation. Again, another convo for a pint, perhaps. So let's think about backwards compatibility. Let's think about progressive enhancement. Let's think about graceful fallbacks for people using older tech. It makes a difference to sustainability. It really, really does. And any back-end developers in the room? I know that we're more of a sort of front-endy conference. Oh, yeah, cool. Okay, 4 or 5 hands. All right, sweet. You folks might like this last point. So there's a new kind of, what's the word? A new discipline emerging called sustainable software development. And sustainable software development is starting to look at using carbon intensity data to schedule compute loads to happen at different times of the day. So for example, if the sun is shining, we're going to have loads of solar on the grid. And those of you that perhaps know a little bit about the grid, you might know that it's storing energy that's actually our biggest problem with renewables. Sustainable software engineering is looking at ways we can shift compute loads around to make use of energy on the grid, renewable energy on the grid the moment it's there, which is way better. So check out the Green Software Foundation. They've got a whole festival of events happening at the moment. So there's a good chance that there might be some online events you can tap into and enjoy. So yeah, this kind of sustainable software engineering concept's really interesting. I might pick a little bone with them though. I'm not sure. It's sustainable software engineering. I think it's decarbonized engineering. But you know, hey, it's all good. It's all progress. All right. So there's tons and tons of books and resources available about this stuff if you're interested in finding out more. Nick, I'm going to embarrass you, mate. I'm really sorry. Nick, who has developed the low, how do you say it, Nick? Lowcarbon.com website? Low carbon website. So Nick, fantastic guy here, has got a whole showcase website where you can pick up design inspiration for building lower carbon websites. So that's worth checking out, as are all of these cool resources on this slide. Okay, but I have some bad news for you. I'm really sorry to say this. I know that all this stuff I've just talked to you about is super exciting, but I've got to bring you back to reality a little bit. We're not going to be able to optimize our way to true sustainability. We can't just optimize this, buy something, or push a button to get us to true sustainability. We have this slight issue called Jevons paradox. Has anybody heard of Jevons paradox before? Yeah, all right, Nick. Yeah. I'm glad you have. All right, sweet. Okay, so let me introduce Jevons paradox to you. Jevons paradox suggests that when we optimize something or when we make it run more efficiently, all we do is create space for that thing to be used more. We don't actually reduce the overall use of it. So the issue when we're optimizing and making our websites more performant is that we're just creating space for it to be used more. We're not actually reducing the overall use, the overall power consumption. It just goes up because it bubbles up in other places. So whilst the optimization stuff is important, whilst we need to do it for all sorts of different reasons around accessibility, around UX, around making the experience better for people, I'm really sorry to tell you, but there is a lot more work to be done within the digital tech sector when we're talking about sustainability. Okay. I debated super, super long and hard about whether to put this guy in my talk. I am not a fan of this guy. This guy is Elon Musk. I kind of put him in because he kind of creates a bit of a talking point, and he's quite quotable. If you read DOUGHNUT Economics, one of the 7 ways of thinking is designed to distribute, and it's all about not hoarding wealth. The richest guy in the world, it's kind of hoarding wealth. Anyway, another conversation over a pint. I'm happy to get on that soapbox with any of you. But he is eminently quotable, and damn, I hate it, but this quote is the most relevant quote I could find to make this point. What this quote says: possibly the most common error of a smart engineer is to optimize a thing that should not exist. Space travel, anyone? I mean, okay. All right, fine. All right, Elon, okay. Anyway. There's a serious point here, though. We do need to ask ourselves, what are we building all this digital for? So digital technologies are there to accelerate things. They're there to accelerate systems and processes that could totally exist without digital tech in the first place. What we are doing is applying our skills and our knowledge to accelerate those things. And that's awesome, that's great. But what solutions are we choosing to accelerate? We've got to ask ourselves these questions. What is the value of what we're doing? And most importantly, for who? Who is benefiting from our work? So up on the slide, I've got a few sort of black and white silhouettes of different sectors of society, different people. And I'll let you decide, who you think your work is serving the most. We have to ask ourselves questions like, who benefits from these solutions? Who stands to lose out? Whose needs are we ignoring? Who has the decision-making power? We know that we've got massive diversity issues in tech. This is another reason why sorting out these diversity issues really, really, really matters, because we need to represent all communities in the decisions that we are making, in the things that we are choosing to accelerate. And who feels the burdens of this tech just simply existing? Who is suffering because we are extracting resources from the ground to put in our phones? Who's suffering for our need for that? So there's lots of really difficult questions to ask ourselves. Okay, so I'm sorry to kind of put a bit of a downer, but look, we've got to talk practically and realistically about this stuff. We can't sugarcoat it with donuts all the time. Okay, so let's talk through a few practical steps. How can you start taking these big questions into your job, into your conversations with your colleagues? So there's lots of things we have to recognize. I want to talk to you about a few things we must recognize first up. First up, this is hard. This is not an easy topic, an easy set of things for us to do. So let's recognize that. Let's be kind to ourselves, and let's recognize this is difficult. It's difficult because the same thinking that got us into this mess is not going to get us out. We have to shift our paradigms. We have to talk about what matters differently. Maybe we need to slow down. I've mentioned that already. Maybe we need to ask ourselves whether growth really is everything we should be seeking, growth of profit. I would argue that actually the thing that we should be growing is human happiness and human contentment and equality. Those things I think we can grow forever. So let's recognize this is hard. Let's recognize we have to shift our way of thinking. Let's also recognize that sustainability and decarbonization are not the same thing. We can decarbonize things in a really unsustainable way that abuse the social foundation that I talked to you about earlier. And folks, within the tech industry, we have enormous levels of privilege. Whether we recognize that or not, we do. We are in a very good position to lead the way on sustainability and asking these questions. 50% of the world's carbon emissions are produced by the world's richest 10%. And if you're earning over 75K, that puts you into the world's richest 10%, if you're lucky enough to earn over 75K. And 3 of the 5 most profitable companies in the world are digital tech companies. So please don't tell me we don't have the resources to do this. We definitely do, and we absolutely can. And it has to come from us, folks, us in the room. We have to be the catalyst for change. So let's talk about a few practical steps about being transparent. How can you be transparent? What does that mean in practice? What that means in practice is being open and honest about your social and your ecological policies. Remember, sustainability is not just about how much energy we're using. It's also all of your social policies as well. So your diversity and inclusion policy is super, super important in this respect, as well as talking about how you operate as an organisation and the resources that you use, e.g. travel. Talk about the companies involved in your supply chain and specifically their ecological and social policies as well. And talk about your ownership and shareholders. Okay, I'm very conscious of time, and I know tummies are rumbling. Mine is definitely rumbling, so I promise this is like the last bit of info I'll give you, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, I wanted just to talk to you very briefly about greenwashy traps and the kinds of things that you might find yourself falling into if you don't have this broad, holistic view of true sustainability. So I see a lot of digital tech companies at the moment giving themselves massive pats on the back because they are optimizing their code and infrastructure. But look, engineers, we bloody love doing this stuff. This is hardly hardly playing the game here. So if you're in a company and they are banging on about how green they are because they're doing wonderful things around optimization, I've got to be honest, folks, I think that's falling into the greenwashing trap. There's more to it than that. I'm not knocking those efforts. I'm not saying we shouldn't do those efforts. What I'm saying is that that's not enough to claim that you're sustainable. Just planting trees or offsets, the clock is kind of ticking on climate change. The problem with planting trees is that they take too long to come online to absorb the carbon. So if you're just planting trees, not saying you shouldn't plant trees, I'm saying if you're only planting trees, all you're doing is giving someone else the burden of dealing with your carbon emissions. We need to deal with our carbon emissions today, now. Planting trees, we do as an optional extra. It's not the first tool we pull out of the toolbox when we're trying to make ourselves sustainable. Imagine yourself in a scenario where you start, sort of like analysing your supply chain, and you find to your great delight that your main supplier is using green energy. Woohoo! Awesome, happy days. That does not make you sustainable. That's just a happy coincidence. You can't really claim that you're green or sustainable just because you're using a data center, such as Google, that are using green energy. Hopefully you've seen from the donut economic model, there's a lot more to think about in terms of sustainability. So you need to think a bit wider. I debated long and hard whether to include this one. I hope I don't offend anyone. Green teams don't belong in a marketing division. They belong deeper in the business, ideally in the finance section, where decisions are made. So if you have a green team in the marketing division, maybe that's the right place for your business, but I'm kind of like a little, I don't know, it smells greenwashy to me. I'm worried that you're just worrying, you're worrying about outward appearances rather than analysing and questioning your own stuff. All right, so pretty much done. Summing up then. So you probably thought I was going to spend 40 minutes talking to you about the things on the left of this screen. Those things say efficient tech, but we did talk a bit about that, using renewable energy, you're all clued up on that already, and buying offsets. And most people, when they come to learning about sustainability in the digital tech industry, start with that kind of viewpoint of that's what we need to do. What I really hope that this talk has kind of impressed upon you is that all of these things that we're talking about within the tech industry, around accessible tech, around diverse workforces, around regenerative business models, open source, using renewable energy, giving a shit about people, basically. This is what sustainability actually means in the broadest sense. And I've written a bit more of an article about that if anybody's interested in having a look. Tom Greenwood, the author of Sustainable Web Design, finishes up in his book by saying, we have nothing to lose. He says, what if this book was a big hoax and the internet doesn't contribute to climate change at all? You'll have spent all this time reading about sustainable web design principles that help us create a faster, more accessible, more enjoyable, easier to use, and more resilient internet. Would that be so bad? And I leave you with this final thought from me. Making sustainable digital services is not a tool or a code problem. It just requires us to human better. Thank you.